Good evening and welcome to Hidden Histories, Urban 15's monthly arts and cultural streaming magazine that explores people and events that have made San Antonio such a rich environment. I want to thank you also because tonight we celebrate the first episode of season 3. We had no idea that we would go on for 3 years with a great collection of ideas, thoughts, and themes that you, the viewers, have been sending to us. Thank you very much for your support, and we hope to continue now into a 4th, 5th, and I don't know how far into the future. So tonight, Hidden Histories is going to take a visit. We took a field trip out to Converse, Texas, and we met with John Talbot from Ragtime Southwest. John is one of the few remaining player piano repairmen in the world. And tonight we'll look at his shop, get his ideas, and show you some of the technologies, air-driven technologies of the player pianos, calliopes, and other devices he has there at the studio. We also are going to get into a conversation with 2 young archaeologists, Sergio and Melinda Urruegas, who are doing research into the earliest stone structures in southern Bexar County, early 1700s, long before the arrival of the Canary Islanders. And we're going to look at their digs and discuss what they're finding over there outside of 1604, just south of downtown. And finally tonight, we're going to have a visit from 2 of San Antonio's most incredible documentary photographers, Ramin Samantari and Michael Nye. They will be in a conversation about Ramin's most recent installation at the Institute of Texas Cultures, where he has 300 black and white photographs of immigrants who now live in San Antonio. It's a powerful piece, and we'll discuss that tonight on Hidden Histories. So enjoy our show, and remember, find us at hiddenhistories.tv. Send us your ideas, thoughts, images, and we'll use them.
Okay, come on around here now. This is, I want to put this band organ on for you. Hot butter flavor popcorn, better than to get at the movies. Try some. Who's next, folks? Step right up. Time to play, time to win. I loved pianos when I was a kid in San Bernardino, California. Our neighbors, the Lay family, had a player piano, and I used to play it. I came home on leave one time, probably when I was 24, 25 years old, saw the neighbor, oh, there's your piano, can I? And I tried to pump it and it wouldn't work. So I was always fascinated by pianos. And I got, when I was in the Air Force, I played around with carnivals because I started working for a carnival when I was a kid in high school. And so I got a cotton candy machine and I used to play around with it. And there's a trade newspaper called Amusement Business. And I was reading that while I was in Okinawa, Japan, and in there was a ad to build a calliope from a kit. So I ordered the catalog, and it turned out not only could you build a calliope from a kit, but you could take any piano and make it into a player piano. And I thought, wow, I can do that. And so I thought, wow, I started having dreams about pianos in people's garages, and what are they going to do with them? Well, here you go. I could make it into a player. So I went out to California, met the guy. He also told me at that time, said, never met anybody that talks so much, which is the same thing my wife told me when I met her in 1970. Anyways, I started doing pianos, and it's been a very successful business. Automated organs started in the 1700s in Germany. So the automatic music came out long before the 1800s, although they did start making pianos in the 1850s. I think the first piano was a pianoforte. I don't know if it was made in France or Germany or Austria. Anyways, they started making square grand pianos and upright pianos. Then in the late 1800s, they started automating them around 1890 and made them into player pianos. Some of the first ones were used in put in bars. They were coin operated, and that's the forerunner to the jukebox. Now, an interesting aside to the jukebox and pianos, how are they related? Well, Rowe AMI jukeboxes are manufactured in the old Kimball Piano Company plant, and that's the old Kimball Piano Company became Rowe jukeboxes. And if you look on the inside of the jukeboxes, you'll see on the label, manufactured by Kimball Piano Company, French Lick, Indiana. How they got the rights for piano rolls is there's a lot of interesting history of that, because you had to have the rights in order to put the piano music on a roll and punch the roll. The major company that did that was QRS. They had a big plant up in New York that just closed, and all their piano roll music went to the same company that I'm a dealer for in Seneca, Pennsylvania. And the problem was, if a song is published, they had to get the rights to that in order to produce a piano roll. It is something that you have to be very careful of when you're punching a roll or making a roll and making the music, because the original author of that music needs to get his due cut of that, just like any music. After so many years, the rights expire, and then anybody can use that music. It's in the general public use. And that's true with a lot of the old player piano rolls from the 20s and the 30s. Now those, because the copyright has expired, are all on the new digital systems that we install and sell. So about 3,000 songs are included with the music that you get when you purchase the piano system and it's because all the rights have expired. To punch a roll, back in the day, they had a master roll that was done by hand and punched by hand. It was connected to a piano, so when you play the note, it would punch the rolls. Cleaned up, and then it was put on another roll, a roll frame that would read the holes in the paper, activate a pneumatic, which would punch the hole. And that was done for many, many, many years. Nowadays, they use electronic solenoids to punch move the punch to punch the hole in the paper, and it runs through, and a step motor to pull the paper through. However, there's a lot of folks now experimenting with using laser technology to cut the rolls out of the paper with a laser eye. Very interesting. In the old roll-operated player pianos, expression was very difficult to put in there, because you had to raise the volume or lower the volume, and that was all done through holes and pneumatics. The digital one is a lot different, because there's a solenoid for the sustain pedal to make it louder. You can make the solenoids hit harder. There's one of the types of music that we have on our pianos is what's called sing-along. And it's like Elton John's there playing the piano live in your house or on the piano, and the other instruments that are playing in the background come through the speaker and they're all synced together. So it's pretty close. In fact, I don't think anybody other than maybe a concert pianist could tell the difference.
Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.
Yeah, the reason that a lot of automatic pianos came out and replaced the pianist is because they didn't have to have them on standby. They didn't have to have certain hours for them to play. They could just turn it on and it would play all evening long. Nothing will replace a live pianist, though. They have the nuances that you can almost not replicate. We do a pretty good job of it at QRS because we can get the expression, we can get everything in there. We also put a record system on there so you can record it and it will play. But for the banks and the hotels, it's easier for them rather than having a live pianist play. It's easier for them just to have the automatic piano playing for them, the player piano. I will tell you a story about a Methodist church here in San Antonio. And the Methodist church called me. They said, hey, we got a bunch of these old pianos. We'd like to take them down. And the minister at the time, and I think it was the Methodist church, I'm not sure, but he told me, he says, look, he says, we have this piano, a couple of these pianos. He said, let me tell you the interesting story about this. He says, the lady that donated it to us, her husband worked at the Lone Star Brewery. And when he came home one day during World War II, he brought this piano home. And his wife said, oh, where'd you get the piano? He said, well, it came from a whorehouse down on the south side of San Antonio. The general came in and closed all the party houses down here. And he says, so I rescued the piano. And the piano happened to be a Thomas Goggins piano, which is made here in Texas. And this is the piano, believe it or not. And it's a Thomas Goggins piano. This piano actually belongs to a customer in Houston that I sold it to. But that piano came out of a whorehouse, which was also a bar, and that's where they played. Now, it was not a player. They had a player piano that would play it. But when they closed them all, he come dragging it home. And the wife was not happy with it in the house, but it was there. And then when he passed away, I think he told me in the 60s, she donated it to the church. When she passed away, that's when they called me, and this had to have been 97 or 98. We had to take it down, and it was on the 3rd floor. And let me tell you what, that was a challenge to get it down, but we did. So if you have a piano that's been in your family for 50, 60 years, you remember Grandma playing the piano, don't give it away, don't throw it away, don't sell it. Let us make it into a player piano so you can have that music playing live in your house. And I will tell you a story. I did one piano for a lady. Her favorite song, her grandmother used to play the piano, and her grandmother's favorite song was In the Mood. When we delivered that piano, just by chance, that happened to be the song loaded on the piano. And when we turned it on and started playing, the lady started crying. She called her dad. Dad, listen to this song. It's Grandma's piano, and she's playing it. Listen. And I mean, the tears just came flowing out of her eyes. You know, she got goosebumps, and I did too. It brought tears to her eyes. So if you have an old piano, don't get rid of it, especially if it's got some family history. Keep that history alive. So why don't we listen to the player piano, and I'll turn this one on for you.
Good evening and welcome to this segment of Hidden Histories. And we have the wonderful opportunity tonight that we're actually talking to people who find things that are physically hidden under the earth, under the shrub, in file cabinets and in Chester drawers in terms of San Antonio's own history. And I'm really welcome that GTI Environmental has agreed to come on and give us an insight as to what work they're doing here in Central Texas and in the San Antonio River Basin area. And Sergio, and I wanted to start out real quickly with you because we have only known each other for a short amount of time, but in my research about you, you've been doing this a long time, this idea of archaeology.
Over 32 years.
So how did you get involved with it?
Early on, my passion has always been about history, and I had an opportunity to go on an excavation in Israel, and I did that for 8 summer seasons. And during that time, my experience in Texas archaeology started to overlap with that experience. And then I eventually got a job with the Texas Historical Commission that issued the permits to conduct archaeological excavations in Texas.
And how did you get involved with the dig?
I originally started out in Ohio, and I've always considered myself a New World girl. So all of my experiences in the New World, and I started out working in Mississippian cultures, and when I moved to Texas, it was very logical for me to work in East Texas with Caddo cultures, and then eventually into the historic period, and gave me a passion for Spanish colonial.
And so a lot of burial mound work and a lot of settlements out there in Mississippi, Alabama.
In Ohio, River Valley, all across the southeastern United States.
Did you work at all with the Serpent?
I've been to the Serpent Mound, I've been to Cahokia, I've been all around the United States. The only state I have left is Alaska that I haven't been to yet, so exploring those kind of sites.
Now Bexar County doesn't have any of the dramatic sites that, say, Serpent Mound or in some of the canyons and the cliff dwellers and stuff. We have, our stuff is like under mesquite tree and shrub, and what is it that makes Bexar County of such interest to you?
Well, you're right. Under the mesquite trees in the Campo, in terms of how the Spanish and the early 1700s considered it, the Campo was the pasture lands of the missions. And San Antonio actually is on par with anything in Boston at Plymouth Rock or at Colonial Williamsburg in Maryland because of the missions. When we think of missions, we think of the compound and the buildings that we see. But back then, it was that, as well as the acequias out in the agricultural lands, and beyond that were the pasture lands. And so all of that area was part of an overall historic cultural landscape of the missions. And those archaeological sites under the mesquite trees are intact and discoverable.
Well, we've had such a boom in development out towards UTSA and the medical complex, the airport 1604, and now the big boom on the south side with Toyota and stuff. Are we in danger of losing things?
There are laws, rules, and regulations that require the city, the state, or federal projects to stop and consider the effects that their projects would have on those archaeological sites and either preserve them in place, and if the project needs to go forward, then the archaeological sites are mitigated.
But see, a guy going out there would say, oh, that's just a hut, and not see a historic, perhaps, value in the jacal that's sitting out there off of a caliche road, and not thinking of it in terms of, this is a tourist attraction if people would want to come here. So how do you control destruction?
Yeah, that's a really good point, because the guy that it would find something like that would most likely be part of a phase of construction, and the kind of work that we do gets done 2 to 5 years before any sort of construction takes place. And so what we do is we go out and we assess the site. We find out whether or not there is something there. If it is there, is it important? If it is important, then it needs to be preserved or fully mitigated. So by that point, by the time the mechanical excavators are coming out, theoretically, the best stuff has already been preserved into an archaeological report.
And so it seems though that there seems to be a discussion about why is something important to all of these commissions and all of these boards. How is importance determined?
Person, places, things. So it's important people, it's important places where events happened, objects that you might find in the ground that actually contribute and tell part of that story. That's the archaeology of it. The things that we actually find underground that are preserved in place, it's a snapshot or a glimpse in history.
So going back in time, where do we really change from historical interest to antiquity? Where does that moment occur?
So that's a really good question. The law defines it as anything that's 50 years or older is considered what you just said would be related
Historical.
to antiquity. And so, because it's that old. Anything 50 years, under 50 years is historical. It could be like the history of a neighborhood of the West Side in the 1980s, 1970s. But anything older than 50 years ago, it falls into the realm of the most recent time period within the historic period.
So moving through time, where is your particular interest right now? Where does GTI, I mean, what do you specialize in?
So we look at the Spanish colonial. So we kind of
Spanish colonial, so we're talking.
So we're talking about when those expeditions started coming in the late 1600s, up through the early 1700s through where San Antonio was established in 1718, all the way up to about 1815.
So what is the first known building in this region that came through that period?
The first known building would be some of the missions. There were jacales and those type of structures that were here, but it would be, things that people would today recognize would be the missions that were actually constructed.
Were there homesteads or ranch houses or
That-
garden
yeah.
posts?
Absolutely,
Yes.
that's what I'm
Prior
referring
to
to
the
as the
missions?
jacales.
To a certain degree. The rules under the 1573 Ordinances of Discovery, New Settlements, and Peace required that the military soldiers and the padres build stone houses for themselves and corrals, and that it had to be in a defensible location. And so before the missions were built, there were some other infrastructure components like housing at first, but also things like the flour mills so that they could make bread to feed the people to then build the missions. But all of that was done according to Fray Musquiz in 1718, that whole infrastructure was built within a couple of years, literally, from the time that they first came in. It was very well regulated, and the people back then followed those regulations and complied with the guidelines.
Well, from the documents that I'm reading, y'all seem to be very concentrating on the ranchos.
Absolutely. I
And-
mean, it's a network of time. One of the examples, he is talking about the infrastructure. So even the acequias, we know that some of the acequias were established and fields were already in agriculture, so much so in 1721 they had a surplus in San Antonio that they were able to send off to other missions. So that's really important. So that means if they're having corn and all of those types of produce and agriculture already available to share, then they were also having the ranches and the cattle and all of those things, those buildings and the establishment was already in place.
So we have several maps that you provided to us and show where these three ranches in particular that are on the map And then I superimposed in my mind, okay, this now is a development here, and this is Toyota, and this is, things like that. How much have we lost to development of the ability to track the, I mean, other than just plaques being in place, what have we lost?
So,
I'm going to let Sergio take
yeah,
that
I'll,
one.
I'll answer that.
Yeah.
In terms of what we've lost, we know that there are only 8 structures still standing left in Bexar County. And so that's partly why, through our grant research, we focused on 2 of them, the Francisco Ruiz Herrera Rancho and the Ignacio Perez Rancho. We also know that in 1760, Fray Solis came through and did an assessment as part of the visita that the king had required. It was one of the 3 branches of government. And in that visita, he talked about these ranchos that were part of the different missions being, he called them pueblos. So there were other types of buildings associated with these one ranchos. And so at that point, we know that there were more of them, but they're no longer here.
So you said only 8 are left in there.
Standing, yes.
And what do you consider standing?
So a standing building is like the building that we're in right now. An extant building, an extant structure is where it's in ruins.
Like the roof is gone. Right?
The roof is gone, the windows are gone, maybe part of the walls, that sort of thing. Now what's interesting is that we have spoken with many, many landowners, some of them being descendants of the earliest settlers of San Antonio, and they have come to us and told us, when they found out about our research, they have told us, well, we have on our land something like what you're documenting. So it may be that it's not completely lost and destroyed by development, it's just that it's been forgotten by the professional literature.
Now we have some photographs here that y'all supplied of some of these locations and stuff. And why don't we go through them real quickly?
There are 2 examples that we can describe. The first one is the jacal, the standing jacal at the Perez Rancho, which is an example of early 1700s architecture. Now the Coahuiltecan people that lived here before also built jacales, which were basically stick and wattle and daub mud on stick walls. And the difference between the 2 is that the jacales that are built by the native people and the Spaniards are following measurements of phi, which is 1.618. It's part of the golden ratio that Felipe V had required of all of his realm beginning in 1700. And in that jacal, we discovered through our excavations that it was semi-subterranean. The roof is very low. Now, it's understandable that it's semi-subterranean because the people that were living here also lived out west. And out west, they had semi-subterranean dwellings. And so that sort of cultural combination of something from the west, something from Spain, and something local. The local is the actual poles, as you can see. It's called palisado construction. The big poles set right next to each other. And the total number of poles on the width multiplied by 1.618 equal the length. And you can see in the diagram of the golden ratio curve where it actually shows the location of the doorways and the windows. And so that's part of what we were talking about. The other example is the Francisco Ruiz Herrera Rancho, where today it's a standing structure with a lean-to addition in the 1860s. And the original structure was rectangular, and that too meets the golden ratio. What we also added as part of our archaeological excavation was we converted all the known measurements today into the Spanish colonial measurements of varas, which is basically an arm's length. So for instance, the Ruiz Herrera Rancho is 5 by 8 varas. And when we overlay the golden ratio onto that floor plan, It illustrates how the doorways and the windows and even the chimney were dictated by those alignments.
So cubits and varas were basically,
Yes, and again, the 1573 ordinances explained how these structures, including the missions, were to be built with sticks and strings. It's as simple as that. Having a stick, having a string, being able to do an arch.
A measurement.
And a measurement of a vara, as somebody that's culturally affiliated, and having worked with my father doing construction, my father built a lot of structures here in San Antonio, and working with him since I was 12, I'd see the workmen get string and from their heart and stretch it out. And that's essentially a vara. And then let it go, pick it up, let it go with sticks and strings. And that's how San Antonio was built.
So at the Ruiz Rancho, we actually were able to take that measurement, and we chose a location where we placed our test unit where we believe the corner of the chimney would be. And so once we did that, it was really incredible because we came down on the exact corner of the chimney. So we found the plaster and everything in place. It was absolutely incredible. And so it's taking that logic and that idea. These people were skilled. They had knowledge. They were not simple. They knew how to construct. They had things that they did that were precise. They were educated. So while we were digging, one of the things that we did out at the Ruiz Rancho is we used some historical archaeology theory where the idea is if you go out the door and you would toss your trash to the left, so or just outside the door, right? So what we did is we actually placed a number of other test units there, thinking that we would find some trash. Well, lo and behold, we didn't just find trash, we actually found the remnants of another structure that went below the actual standing Hakal that dated to an earlier time period in the 1700s.
And that building was made out of stone in accordance with the regulations. And the earliest artifacts that we found on surfaces inside that stone structure and outside dated to the earlier 1700s.
now, when you refer to artifacts, are we talking about shards of pottery, tools, broken items, or what was intact?
Yes. So for
Absolutely.
instance, one of the Coahuiltecan practices in building was to place a dedication object that imbued life into the structure, because in their cosmology they believe everything has life. We found a piece of napped glass that was purposely placed in between the stone layers. And so that was part of, now we know that the Coahuiltecans had helped build that stone structure. There was a piece of pottery on the inside, on the very first surface, because there was multiple surfaces as it went down. That earliest piece of pottery was something that is called Mexican red painted ware. And it looks like another type called tonala or even Goliad red. And we did XRF elemental analysis on that piece of pottery, and we found traces of yttrium. And yttrium is only found in monzonite sand ore that was only found and mined in Brazil at that time. We found that by doing research in old mining journals from the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we know that that piece of pottery was produced in Brazil, shipped to Mexico, and it made its way over here to San Antonio. So even the people then, and the earliest history of San Antonio, was part of an overall international trade network.
Well, I think that brings us to the realization that we need another episode with y'all to talk about that international trade route, because you know it's long before NAFTA. What
it
y'all
is.
are discussing this, But I want to thank y'all very much, and I look forward to the continuing relationship between GTI and Urban 15, because we really are dealing with that hidden history, and y'all are doing a fabulous job with it.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
And
very
again,
honored that you asked us to be part of your program.
And again, we invite you, the listeners and the viewers, to go to their website, and you can follow up on many, many research projects they're pursuing here. And number of the papers they've written. So thank you very much. Good evening, and we have a special guest tonight for Hidden Histories. It's a local photographer and an artist, Ramin Samandari, who will be discussing what I consider one of the more impactful photography projects of the last few years here in San Antonio. And it deals with a timely subject, immigration. And Ramin, thanks for being part of Hidden Histories tonight.
Thank you, George. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Now, your piece, can you give us, like, how did it evolve? Why did you choose the title it is?
Yeah, I started thinking about it in late 2016. I mean, coinciding with the election of 2016. But the background is I'm a first generation immigrant myself, and I came to the States from Iran in 1979, and I lived in West Texas for the first 10 years. And at the time, post-revolution Iran, relations were going bad right away. And so I experienced this notion of otherness and being an immigrant, a foreigner, but at the same time, sort of the negative aspects of, especially where I was from. So this was something always with you as an immigrant. And after 2016 election, I wanted to do something about what I was hearing, what we were all hearing about the anti-immigrant sort of sentiment, anti-foreigner, and all of that. And so huddled masses sort of made sense. I borrowed it from the Emma Lazarus poem on the Statue of Liberty. I added to it who we are. And I started photographing people, and I would give them a 8x10 white dry erase board and ask them to write something of their ancestral history. First, I had the idea of photographing one person from every nation in the world, 215, I think, official. Then I kind of switched it that I don't want to photograph just people who are first generation immigrants, because America is made up of, it's an immigrant nation with a short history relative to a lot of other countries. And so it was open to all comers, first generation, second generation, fifth generation, even Native Americans who immigrated here 15,000 years ago. Then the idea was the story of mankind on the move, and we've been on the move since 200,000 years ago. We walked out of Africa, and we've been scattered all over the world. So there's no nationhood is sort of a new concept in the history of mankind, and in America is very new. So that was the beginning of the thought process I wanted to do.
So who was the first photograph? What was the first photograph of the series that you took?
The first photograph was actually myself. I wanted to see what it would look like, so I got the card and I wrote on there Iranian American, and just set the camera on a tripod and did myself. It never made it to, I didn't put it up for the exhibit, but I did it as an example of what people could expect, and at the same time I wanted to see what it would look like. So it was a different shot from all the rest of them. It's a much tighter shot because I did it close up of myself. And then after that, I had my studio being where it is, first Fridays every month, the art walk and so on. People would come in, and I had my background and light set up and ready to go, and I would just ask them this is what I'm doing, and would they be interested in participating? And I'd give them the board, and they would write it, and they'd sign the release and go from there. The first one, other than myself, that I did, actually, I don't have the name because it was a young couple came in, both Russian background, and they were the first one, as far as not myself. But then it just grew, and I posted it on social media, and word of mouth got around, and more people wanted to be included.
Of the photographs, which is the one that you feel is the most bare, emotionally and politically?
There are two that strike me. One is Ramon Vasquez de Sanchez. He's an elder of the Coeltecan tribe, and he came and he was wearing appropriate clothing of his when he does the tribal activities. Just his face and the attitude that he exudes. I look at the photos, one based on what they wrote, and another one just from an aesthetic, what does the face look like? And his is one of the striking ones. Another one is another guy, his name is Claudio San Miguel, and he was the first one that he wrote actually a political statement. I call it a political statement. And he wrote immigration, ? The border moved and took over my country. I heard that from a number of people who were fifth, sixth generation from Texas, and they would tell the same history. But he's the one that wrote it. And and then another one was another young guy. He was a student in one of my classes, and it was Manuel. And he told me he was undocumented. And I said, well, your name isn't going to be included in the photo. And so he deliberated and decided to write undocumented. And he wrote undocumented, and he's kind of has a very, almost a sad kind of expression. And then a week later, he called me and he said, can I do it again? And that was like one of the only few that wanted to do it again. And he came, this time he's laughing, and he changed his statement. He said he wrote undocumented alien, and he drew a little picture of a spaceship with a little alien figure. And he wanted to have it kind of a tongue-in-cheek message. So I used that one for the project.
When we had the premiere of it, I guess the Institute of Texas Cultures was a fabulous opening. What struck me was the calligraphy or the handwriting as of different people. People wrote all caps, or some did it in script, or some did it, in at an angle or something. But there was something telling in the way they wrote their messages.
There was. I mean, some people were just very straightforward. And they had actually done their DNA, the 23andMe, one of those, and they brought the piece of paper that they got back as far as the percentages that they gave them, different ethnicities, and they wrote exactly that. So it was very specific. I'm 28% Irish, 15% such and such. And then some people, actually 2 or 3 people, Albert Gonzalez was one, James Rosca, another one. They're both artists, actually. They wrote question marks or an X, and they weren't trying to be cute, but they just didn't really know. I think James was, he said he was adopted, so he didn't really never have any idea of what his ethnic background would be.
But you have done a number of pieces now that are identity based or work, and as a documentary photographer, I guess you might almost think of it as documentary portraiture, or how do you see the work, the art?
Well, I mean, they are portraits. By the definition of a portrait, they're a studio portrait. But they're not done in a form of a portrait to be necessarily flattering, as we understand, like maybe glamour portrait or something like that. They're straightforward, and but the underlying message, like in this project where they're holding the board, I noticed that the viewers, almost everybody who looked at the show, they're more fascinated with that, what the person wrote, than actually the face, because the eye goes right to that whiteboard, and they're curious to see where someone is from, or what their statement was, and looking at the face is kind of secondary almost. So that was a revelation to see. So the message is actually precedes the portrait in a way. The series before, there was the artist faces. And that one didn't have any props, so it was just the face of the artist, and there was nowhere else to look except into the artist's face. And I did it purposely like that to just focus on just that element.
So were there any ones that surprised you?
Well, yeah, there were several. I think I was surprised when Ron Nirenberg, the mayor, when I photographed him, it was in 2017, so he wasn't in office yet. It was during that week of the runoff of his first election, and he came, and I just had made assumptions that Ron Nirenberg is going to be straightforward, mixture of European backgrounds. But then he wrote all these places, Philippines, India, and lots of different areas that I did not at all suspect. Which actually, that was a surprise with almost everyone. And that was another revelation for me doing this project, was that when you look at someone or you hear their name, we immediately assume something about their ancestry. And so many times it's either not accurate, or there's so much more to it than just what the assumption is. So I was constantly surprised by that, where people who looked Caucasian would write something of like native Chickasaw or something like that in their historical background. So I'll never make assumptions by looking at someone thinking that where they might be from.
So what are the plans for this show? Now, you've already premiered here in San Antonio,
Right.
and what do you want to do with the work?
Well, right now, I mean, the work that I delivered to Institute of Text and Culture was, I finished the project in late 2018. And I was kind of looking for a home for it and funding. Because of the large number of images, it required a large space for one thing, and kind of a costly endeavor. So I approached Institute of Text and Culture, and they were interested in housing it permanently. So this project is basically theirs to keep, and they're going to keep it on display permanently. So that it's not going anywhere. I do hope at some point to actually make a book, but that's still sort of at the unknown.
So if a person wants to see your collection, can they go onto your website and see all of the imagery?
Yes, I do have a section in there under exhibits, and this is listed in there. So all 300 images are in a slideshow.
Okay, well, we'll just put the the link there on a slide here in a few minutes,
Sure.
so the audience can get access to it.
Okay.
That would be very, very helpful. But we've only seen a scattering in this program today of the work, so I'm looking forward to getting online and seeing all 300.
All of them.
Now, what we're going to do right now is bring a friend in,
Okay.
a fellow photographer, Michael Nye, and we want to have a conversation because the two of you are taking photography from action into concept and into identity. And I think that it'd be great if we had a conversation. So we'll just segue into Michael, bringing him up, and we'll have a conversation.
Okay, that's terrific. I've known Michael for a number of years, and he actually has been an inspiration and sort of a role model for me for these types of long-term projects. Watching him, the tenacity he has, the longevity to pursue a single project for so many years. So it'd be delightful, yeah.
Okay, well, Hidden Histories, we're going to extend a thank you for your work here that you've done in the community, and let's continue helping the image, the image continue of our community. Thank you very much, Ramin.
Thank you, George.
We're visiting right now with two of the most influential photographers, particularly documentary photographers in this part of the nation, probably in the nation. And we're very lucky that both are residents of San Antonio. We have Ramin and we have Michael Nye as well. But Ramin is known for his big projects, and Michael has been doing social action photography work for almost 30 years now, 20 years?
40 years.
40 years now.
40 years.
Okay, so one of the things I want to find out is, why do you even take pictures?
I see it as almost a calling, in a way, that things need to be documented, things need to be preserved, and photography captures the very specific moment in time or in a person's life, and I want to be there. I'm curious to capture that and just preserve it. That's as far as documentary photography or any kind of photography I do. That's what I'm going for.
And Michael, you're very conscious of time and process in all of your work. What motivates you to do what you do?
For me, photography has always been about inquiry. I've loved what this philosopher said, Maurice Lick. He was 1920s and 30s philosopher, German. And he said that philosophy is not a body of doctrine, but it's an activity. I like that. And I think what's motivated me also is the questions that Immanuel Kant asked in Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. And just profound questions that every one of us ask. What do you do in your life? Today, this afternoon, next week? What does it mean to be human? I think what he's asking, what do we have in common? What's the extent of our knowledge? What can we know? What's the limits? What's the source? And the last, what can we expect from the future? So I think with me, all of my work has been about wanting to be engaged in conversation, wanting to be out in the world, wanting to learn from other people. Everyone has a wisdom about their experience that no one else knows. What is that? What do they know? So a lot of my projects the last 20 years have been about photography and audio and commingling those into projects that travel around the country.
Now, for me, my observation of documentary photography was that it was action-based or action-driven, where a person is trying to capture this moment in time and what people are doing. And a lot of the photographers that are, dominated the world of documentary photography, they're often construction, combat, people doing work. And the two of you, though, have a way of not doing action in your photography. And where does... So, I mean, is this a new thing in photography? Or is this about your own art form?
Well, I see it as a little bit divergence. Documentary in the sense of if it's capturing a newsworthy. When I used to study books about photography back in those days, I was very attracted to that style of photography, whether it was war photographers or even social photographers who captured people in their environment and in their life and doing things. So I think maybe a little subcategory of documentary that doesn't have to do with the newsworthy subject, but it has to do with just everyday people and everybody's story, just regular people. So yeah, it's a little bit different. At one point, I actually wanted to be a action photographer, like a newspaper photographer, and capture those moments of news. But that didn't work out for me. I was not cut out for it. So this is a little bit different.
You know, for Michael, the courtroom seems to be a very dramatic place, and that's what we usually think of the law. But it's the research and the inquiry and all of these things that seem to be the behind-the-scenes drama of knowledge and law is kind of where your detailed work comes
Well,
from.
I use an 8x10 view camera. It's one of those big box
Yeah.
cameras that Matthew Brady used. You put a hood over your head, the image is upside down. I've used it for 35 years, and I still use it today. And I have a wet darkroom, so I make silver prints. But I remember walking downtown, practicing my voir dire examination, and everything was a photograph to me. And I remember having this fever and hunger to make a switch. I like law. I mean, I like the sense that you know something about jurisprudence and how important justice is, because a lot of my work deals with social justice issues. But I really wanted to be out in the world, and so I made a gradual change, started doing consulting work. But this last project of mine, I spent 7 years interviewing people that are blind and visually impaired around the country. And so it opened at the Whitty Museum, went to Milwaukee. Right now it's in West Texas at a big museum. And you walk into a museum and there's a big black and white portrait with headphones. And you put on the headphones and that person speaks to you in their own voice about their life. And if I could just tell a short story briefly, if you don't mind. I was in Saudi Arabia in the 80s. I had an exhibit there. I was on Arts America tour. And it was in Riyadh, the capital, and the curator said, would you talk to some international blind students? I didn't think anything about it. And so there were a dozen or so, and we started walking around, and I've never in my life been around a group of people that listened with such intensity and purpose. I mean, it was like a whisper could travel far. And all of a sudden, they started asking me questions. What color is black? How do you describe white? Why are you a photographer? What do these photographs mean? What's beautiful that's non-visual? How does anyone understand the world outside themselves? I mean, again, back to really deep philosophical questions about life. And I said then, someday I want to go back and really have conversations about perception, about adaptation, about discrimination, about understanding from the inside, not the outside. So I spent 2 to 4 days with every single person. And it was what a privilege. I just can't even tell you what I've learned from them.
So both of you are dealing with time, and it's ironic that the pursuit of the moment that the shutter is open, you're trying to open up an eternity. At the same time, you're moving at 1,000th of a second, or whatever it is. How do y'all do that?
Well, I think photography inherently is ambiguous. It's susceptible to multiple meanings, and it's always more than or less than what's there. So it has that mystery to it. And I think Ramin has some thoughts about that too.
No, I mean, I was interested to hear what you were going to say first. It is a kind of a nebulous kind of art, because unlike any other medium, it is instantaneous, but then it is conveying something that's maybe eternal. And that's one of the things that fascinates me about photography. I was a med student when I came here. I was supposed to go into medicine, and as much as interested I was, again, with fascination with just people's faces. I walk around staring at people's faces all the time. Something about it that tells history about who they are and what they think. And I don't pretend to be able to capture that in one image, but I like to think of it as I'm finding not the truth, but a truth whenever I photograph someone's face, hopefully.
A lot of people have trouble being in front of the camera and they feel very uncomfortable. But there's the good photographers become invisible and the camera can't even be seen through when you're working with an individual. And there's a different psychology and a personality of the photographer versus the painters.
Right.
And can you give me have a discussion on that?
Go ahead, Michael.
Well, for me, I've done a lot of things other than portraiture. I've gone into Siberia by myself in the middle of winter with an 8x10 view camera in a village. I put my finger on a map and went to China for 5 weeks near Tibet and Burma, refugee camps in the Middle East, in Africa, Algeria, Morocco, deserts, and Labrador near Greenland, alone with a big camera and just going in a sense of just not trying to get exotic imagery, but just more about understanding. So for me, photography is never about truth, although you want to be truthful. You want to have a fidelity to the experience. But it's more about presence. I remember, if I could tell just a really short story, I was doing my mental health project on mental health. I spent 4 years interviewing people with mental illness. My law partner had committed suicide, and I wanted to know more about depression and different issues. And I interviewed this young woman in a big city. She was sleeping outdoors, and she told me the night before it was 36 degrees. She had bipolar disorder, psychosis. This guy came up to her and brought a sack of groceries, took off all of his clothes, shoes, coat, jacket, left it and left. And I said, Tiffany, what did you think? And she said, I was flattered. I've never heard someone use flattered before. But I hope someone didn't stop this guy. The policeman didn't on the way home after he took all of his clothes off. But I think what I was after was a sense of a fidelity to her experience and a presence, that the photograph had a presence about her life. And maybe that's truthful in a sense, but photography is not the same thing as what we see. It's a different medium.
It's very true, yes. And a lot of things that have interested me about photography. Portrait is something I've been doing for the last, let's say, 8 years intensively. But before that, I did a lot of landscape and a lot of figures within the landscape. And I was trying to, it was a self-discovery. Also, photography for me, it has always been a self-discovery too. Those periods when I did those images, the sense of isolation, and I think they came out in the image, would be an isolated figure and an isolated piece of a landscape that looks beautiful, but at the same time has a psychology of loneliness and isolation. I did a lot of work early days with a view camera, as a matter of fact, of that nature. And what led me to be portrait was that project I did with the artist Faces in 2013. Started out with just photographing faces, and I was looking for, I think I thought of it as faces and emotions, and see what emotion does a face convey in its natural form. And people look at other people and they can read an emotion in their face. I was trying to see what a photograph would look like in that sense. And it really got me hooked to explore this notion of faces and emotions. So everything I've done since then, sort of an offshoot of that, with the context of like the immigration series, or what I'm working on the Muslim community. It still has to do with those faces.
So much at times I look at photographers that come from the chemical world, and y'all are very much like monastic because you spend so much time in the dark room,
Right,
And you're almost like illumination, calligraphy. You have to work on it. But with the advent of instantaneous photography, Instagram world and everything else, we're seeing that monastic deliberateness might be something from the past. How do we deal with that?
Well, I still like going out and photographing with 9 negatives. I mean, you have negatives in these film holders, and you've got a big camera and a tripod. So I like that, the slowness of it, how things unfold into themselves, and having fewer negatives, making you be more thoughtful about what you want to photograph.
I agree. I came out of the darkroom too. I can't do darkroom work anymore, even if I wanted to, because I discovered recently that physically I've become oversensitive to the chemistry, having practically lived in a darkroom, because I had my darkroom in the house and it wasn't very well ventilated for a lot of years. And but there is a magic about that isolation and the slowness. And even though I work digitally primarily now, I still have the habit from the shooting large format that every sheet of film has to count for something. You don't just shoot, and then decide later which one is. So I still practice it the same way, even with the digital. Even though I can shoot a lot, I still don't shoot a lot. I think I did the whole artist series of 280 faces. Everyone got one shot, I think, except a few here and there. And it didn't sit well with a lot of people, but they thought, well, then, one shot, that's, do more. But so yeah, it is different, and the photography has changed definitely with the digital and cell phones and those kinds of things, instantaneous nature of it. But I think there's still a place for deliberative photography. I teach classes, and that's one of the things I stress a lot. Don't shoot 1,000 pictures hoping one will come out okay. Decide when you're shooting.
Well, gentlemen, look, there's a lot for San Antonio to learn in these conversations right now, and it would be great if we could continue this conversation into the future and include some more people from the photography community. But as wrapping this up, is there anything, Mike, that you've been wanting to say that you haven't?
There is. How much I admire Ramin's work. He did a substantive project on San Antonio artists, 165 images or more, and then the Huddled Masses on identity and heritage, 300 images. And I really loved this one quote, if I have it here real quickly. I brought this out. Oops, I can't find it right now. Here it is. David Rubin talked about Ramin's work. His subjects are joined together in moments of concentrated stillness, which is the universal sensation of being alive. And I think his work has done that so well. He's done some really important projects in San Antonio. We're lucky to have him here.
So anyway, people watching today, Hidden Histories, we're going to continue bringing you the most interesting people and unknown people of our community. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. We had a great time putting it together with these special guests. I want to remind you now, on April 6th, we have Mega Corazon. The Hidden Histories episode will be devoted to some of the collections of poetry that exist in San Antonio. We'll have a great discussion with poets who are reciting as part of National Poetry Month. I want to take an opportunity right now to thank the patrons and sponsors who made this possible. The City of San Antonio Department of Arts and Culture, Film SA, Bexar County Department of Community Resources, the Texas Commission on the Arts, Humanities Texas, the Capital Group, and Friends of Urban 15. Without these supporters and patrons, we couldn't bring you such a great show. So thank you. Stay in touch. April 6th, Hidden Histories, Mega Corazon.